Well, hello out there, Ricecast family. We are back. We're here together, spending this time together. You know, what I love about podcasts, people listen, Pastor, they listen to podcasts at all kinds of times of their day. Maybe they're driving to work.
Right.
Maybe they're cleaning their house. Maybe they're going on a jog. And you and I, we're a part of this activity now.
Absolutely.
We're here with them. You know, maybe you're doing the dishes at your house. You're not doing them by yourself. We're here with you. We're a team.
Absolutely. I wish I could be at the beach with you right now.
Maybe you're at the beach. Then we wish we were there. And if you are like doing, cleaning stuff, then we're happy to be where we are and just supporting you.
Happy to encourage.
And encouraging you.
Right.
That's my favorite kind of group project. The one where you're doing all the cleaning.
And we're doing the encouraging.
I'm just here chatting. But it's fun. We are here with the Ricecast. My name is Anthony Russo. We are here with the one, the only Dr. Pastor Willie Rice. Dr. Willie Rice, how you feeling today?
Doing fine. Got a busy week going on here at Calvary. A lot of good things happening, as just always around here stuff is happening. And so an exciting time. Looking forward to finishing the series that we've been in this coming weekend. And it's been a good series, been enjoyable to teach, and we've got a lot of very good response to it.
Yes, and I want to talk about the series a little bit before we get into our main topic for the day.
Okay.
But what also needs to be addressed is that fall has really fallen here in Clearwater, Florida.
Right. We had our 8 hours of fall that came. And
it's a short season here.
It's a short season. It usually lasts early one morning. It's gone about lunch. No, we've had a beautiful week. You get that sometimes right here in October somewhere. October's kind of a hard month because everyone else is enjoying fall. I was recently up in New England, and it's fall and pumpkins and sweaters.
Yep.
And we're still, going to the beach, and it's still 88 degrees.
Right.
But then somewhere in October sometimes there's that first touch, and it's not like leaves don't change, and, you don't need a sweater.
Right.
It's just all of a sudden very nice outside.
Right.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And you notice it.
And you drive by a dead palm branch, maybe.
A palm branch is
that has fallen down.
And it makes you think of Vermont.
It just went straight to brown. No fun color.
Straight
just
to brown.
A dead brown palm branch. But they happen. When that day comes, these last couple of days really have been there, are you pouring your pumpkin coffee? Do you do the pumpkin coffee?
We do the pumpkin spice creamer is what we do. And yes, I like that. I'm a big pumpkin guy. My wife, so here's a tradition, and some people know this, but I think everyone on the podcast needs to know.
Yeah.
I really have told her many years, I think it is our ticket to wealth and fame if we could ever figure out how to do this. Maybe someone can help us. But she makes, my wife's a very good cook, but she has a family recipe that I think she's perfected. She is elevated and perfected for pumpkin cookies. Pumpkin cookies. And the people who know come to get them. She makes several hundred of these.
Wow.
And gives them away. In fact, I have a thing I'm supposed to bring to the office, and I keep forgetting to do that on purpose. Accidentally. And so she makes and she did that last weekend, which was a little late. But to me, that's kind of the fall.
Yeah.
Like when Cheryl makes the pumpkin cookies.
Right.
It's there you are. And it is, I must say this, they are among the greatest things I have ever eaten in my life.
Wow.
That's just my personal opinion, but they are absolutely unique and fantastic.
Yes.
And I think if we could market these, like if we knew anything about mass production, which we do not, it's just like I've seen people lining up at Shacks and restaurants to get, a thing, whether it's ice cream or that place has a certain thing.
Right.
This would be the thing
right.
if someone had these.
Right.
People would come in buses
right.
to get pumpkin cookies. They're extraordinary.
Couple reflections we got to talk about on that right away. First of all, I love that there are pastors out there that would seek fame and fortune through their platform. Not our pastor.
No.
Our pastor says the path is through Cheryl's cookies.
Pumpkin cookies. You should not seek wealth because of the gospel. But it says nothing in the Bible about cookies.
But the cookie empire will be built.
I do dream of that, yeah.
And here's the thing. I'd heard about these cookies. I've been, for the listeners, that maybe another day we'll go into my story here at Calvary. But I haven't been at Calvary for all that long, not as long as other people have. And I have heard of the pumpkin cookies.
Okay.
The rumors of the pumpkin cookies had reached me. Just this very day, Pastor. I believe this month is Pastor Appreciation Month,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was the purpose. But Cheryl dropped by my office with a bag of 6 pumpkin cookies.
Did she? Okay.
I had not had the cookies before. I'd heard of the cookies.
Okay.
But I was like, this is.
So did you have one today?
I have had a couple. We won't get into the specifics on how many I've had.
Because your wife may be listening.
They are fantastic.
Yes.
The rumors are true. It's pumpkin, it's chocolate chips, it's icing, it's
the whole thing.
Perfect. It's so good. And here's where she gets you though, Pastor, and this is why props to you for not being 700 pounds larger than you are. The cookies are just perfectly bite-sized.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So you always could eat one more of these cookies, if you know what I'm getting at. Sometimes you get these big cookies, you're like, I couldn't possibly get into another big, or a donut maybe, you're like, I can't do another whole donut. These cookies
you could always do another.
You could always do one more.
Which is why usually around the first of the year I need to drop a few pounds. Really.
Pumpkin cookies.
And I'm feeling that a little. So.
And let's keep talking about Cheryl just for a minute. Women's Night of Worship in the Word. Right. She did a fantastic job, brought a powerful message to the women.
Very proud of her. There are a number of women that have been putting this on for a number of years. She would be the first to call out several who just behind the scenes work. But it's a great event, and I think we had hundreds of women here Monday night and many more online. Mm-hmm. And Jen Smith does a fantastic job leading in worship. Of course, we all love Jennifer. She's such an important worship leader here at Calvary and has been almost my entire ministry here. So, and then Cheryl teaches, and Cheryl, just has always had a gift for teaching all of our life. That's, she would do that. I think regardless of who she was married to, she loves the Word, and she works very hard. Man, she prays, she labors, she writes, and then a number of other women just who really have teamed up, and so it's a great event for women. I hope I don't even know if it's still online to be able to access.
It is,
or not.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
So it's on YouTube. If you missed it, you would be encouraged by it, and they do this several times a year, and it's always a great night.
And I just want to brag on them even a little bit more for the team that is running in support of them. The prayer time before the night has even become something that people talk about and look forward to because it's so special, so considerately put together and thought out. And it was a really great night. She did a really great job. And so she knocks that out on Monday and then walks in
with pumpkin cookies.
What
a woman. She's an incredible woman. That's
come on.
That's unbelievable.
Come on.
Yeah.
She's the path to fame and fortune, Pastor. You're exactly right. One more kind of current event I wanted to ask you about because it came up and I thought, you know what? I haven't heard Pastor weigh in on this. The new James Bond movie is out.
Oh, is it?
Pastor, are you a James Bond fan?
Only moderate. I've seen many of the movies, but I think I was aware there was a new one, but I have not seen it. So
this is Daniel Craig's last.
Yeah, I think
Bond.
I saw that in something, and so of course they say that, and then that's not always the case.
Right.
Wasn't that the case with Roger Moore? Like he was done, and then they came back and did a couple.
Yeah.
But
the old Brett Favre retirement.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
That's it. I'm done for real now.
No, I haven't seen it.
Well, it's out.
Okay.
It's good to know you're a moderate James Bond fan.
Modest, James, yeah.
This is the kind of hot takes that people tune into the Ricecast for, right?
Well, it's the same plot every time. It's,
You don't know if he might not make it out of this one.
That's right. He's falling out of a plane, tied up, and on fire.
Surely, this time.
But somehow he will escape, yeah.
What was the movie we talked about a while ago with Liam Taken? The Taken plots. Man, oh man.
Yeah, but by the time you get to the third one,
his poor daughter. You're at the beginning of the movie, you're like, will you just stay home? Just stay home. We know this is not going to go well if you leave that house.
That's so funny.
Oh, Bond's out. Fall is here. Oh, lastly, of course, we got to talk about Bucks are still rolling along.
Yep.
5-1 now, I think.
That's true, and the Gators are not.
I wasn't going to bring it up. I had made a note.
They're rolling, but in the wrong direction. And we could do an entire podcast where I would vent on that, but it would probably not be good. So, but the Bucks are indeed rolling, and so we're happy about that.
Like you said, and it's been said before, misery loves company. Every Florida college, if you are a Florida college fan,
I grew up in the era where Florida State, Miami would all at times be in the top. They would always be in the top 10.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were in the top 5, all 3 of them.
Right.
It was whoever emerged from that was going to, perhaps win the national championship. And But boy, now I don't think any one of them are ranked, and we're just, it's a very sad state of affairs.
It's not good, but the weather's great, so we have that going for us.
That's right.
Even if our college football teams are not so great. But you brought up earlier, and I guess we should get down to business. You brought up earlier, we are about to wrap up our Gospel Vision series, which has been so well received. People online, people here that have been here at the campus, people within our groups talking about how great this series has been, how timely the series has been. I was curious, as you're preparing and delivering, preparing to teach and share the messages in a series like this, is there anything that you've learned as you've prepped for this series? Anything that has kind of jumped out at you, or is that still something that happens when you prep a series?
Absolutely. I think every time, that's the beauty of the Bible is even when you're dealing with a familiar passage, you press into it, you just come away seeing things. And part of the job of getting ready to preach a message is just to press into that level of detail that, okay, I've read that verse. What exactly does that phrase that mean? So I think every time I learn, and I've learned a ton in this series, just, as you just kind of wrestle with each text. I think that whole idea, and which I've known before, but about how Romans turns there at chapter 12 from, and we've shared that and known that, but from the doctrinal to the practical, and then just pressing into gospel vision means this is how we live. Gospel vision means this is how we think. And I guess just the importance of learning to think along the lines of gospel vision, gospel worldview. That's just, so been impressed upon me so greatly in this series.
Well, it has been a great series. If you've missed any of it, it's also available on our YouTube channel. We always put the link to the last sermon. We do this podcast. We usually record it on Wednesdays. So I don't know when everybody listens. I know that can differ. But as the recording of this podcast, we put the last sermon in the notes for the show. So you can go back and watch it, because we are going to be referencing it a lot in our little conversation today. Because like you said, it was a great message this last Sunday. And you talked, it was very practical. And in the beginning part of it, you talked about submitting to governmental authorities. And really that's the call in Romans, to submit to governmental authorities. But then you taught through, well, there are obviously times where that's not what we should be doing as followers of Christ. Which I kind of thought was interesting, because even just the idea that our bent as Christians should be to submit to governmental authorities. And you said, you have to remember Paul's writing this under Roman rule, which was this vast empire. Its subjects did not have the rights that we have today. And I wondered even, do you think the idea of submitting to governmental authority is even a little irksome just by nature to us as American Christians, our history being we broke off from a governmental authority?
I do. I think we do struggle with that a little bit. The idea of submission is seen as a weak word in our today's culture. And yet, so that's why, passages about wives submitting to their husbands seem so offensive to people. Well, part of it isn't just the male-female dynamic. It's the word submission seems like a power trip. It seems like weakness. You remember, well, you don't remember, but back when I was a kid, and, he was before my time, but Frank Sinatra wrote, had this famous My Way song.
Oh,
yeah. And there's a line in there about, something about I'm not the one who kneels, In other words, I'm not submitting to anyone. I'm going to do it my way. That's our hero in America. American government was formed in an insurrection, in a rebellion against a monarchy, as we all know, our history. So you're right. I do think in the West, we stress the Western civilization. There's been a stress on independence, upon individual liberty and freedom. Those are good things, good words. But we've had such a stress into that we sometimes demean values about the importance of authority at times and the need to submit to those who are in authority, which is something that the Bible teaches there in Romans 13. Admittedly, when you read it, you wrestle with that concept. But to answer your question, yes, I do think sometimes we come from a particular bent of independence, and we pride ourselves on that. And again, there's a lot I'm very thankful for about that. But it may lead us at times to be a bit too cantankerous and too quickly to go to, I'm not going to do what they tell me to do. There's always like a certain segment in America that wants to stick it to the man. It's like, I'm not going to do what they want me to do. And we kind of feel empowered when we do that. I get that. I really do understand that.
Yeah.
And there's a place for courage and standing, and we can look at the Bible and see that woven through, as we talked about last week. But there is this command, and that's what we were talking about. How then should we live? And Paul goes into very practical conversations about government and paying taxes and submitting to those in authority, and calls on Christians to live out their worldview by understanding the role and need for government, and therefore to submit to those who are in authority.
Yeah, I mean, as Americans, I would agree, and I think you can see this reflected a couple ways. And I'm going to point to, the metric system. We're not doing the metric system.
Who's going to tell us what to do?
You're not going to tell us.
Yeah,
We're doing our feet and our inches. We're the only ones doing it, but we'll do it
the way the Bible intended, I should say.
Feet and inches. I was even thinking into how just thinking through this conversation, I'm thinking even in terms of, like, we always talk about sports here, but the whole world is into soccer, and we've always kind of held off a little bit.
Right,
we like football, which we made up, and basketball and baseball, and there's a very individuality over here.
And that's good. None of those things. We're not criticizing any of
course,
that.
right.
Obviously, we perfected the game of soccer. We vastly improved it. I don't think there's any question about that. But again, we value those things. I have heard there have been some famous preachers who I won't quote because I don't want to misquote them, and I'm not trying to disparage anyone.
Yeah.
But there have been some famous conservatives who people would recognize, who in teaching Romans 13, the passage about submitting to authorities, criticized the American Revolution even, as if that was a violation of that. We can't do anything about it now, but we were very rebellious from the beginning. Well, I don't agree with that. I think when you look back on our history, and again, I may be looking with red, white, and blue eyes, but you saw some unjust tyrannies, and as we talked about, there are many examples in the Bible of times and places where you turn a certain corner, you cross a certain line where it is seen as a just and righteous thing to rebel against an unjust and unrighteous authority. That does not negate Romans 13, though, which is that our disposition and bent should be to understand the importance of government and understand that it is needed in a broken world to restrain evil. That's the argument Paul is making. Given a Christian worldview, we need government to restrain evil in the world. That's inarguably true. And the only revolutions that succeed in the world are those that leave an unjust and tyrannical form of government to embrace a strong form of government that is more just. And people do submit to that government. Where there has been a desire to simply, we get to do whatever we want, or there's anarchy, it never works.
Right. Yeah, and I loved what you said even in the message of even when you make a choice to not submit to the government, you do so because of your submission to a higher authority.
It's like, I think the bent there is always, okay, I understand I'm not the final authority. I need to be under accountability. So as I use Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for an example, they did not bow down to the Babylonian idol, but it was because in their hearts they bowed to the Lord God alone.
Right.
So it wasn't this insolent rebellion, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do, stick it in your ear. It was, I cannot do that because I can only worship God alone. And so it wasn't rebellion that caused them to rebel. It was their submission to God that caused them to refuse to rebel against God. And that, as we process this, has to be where that line comes.
Right.
I don't think it's a good testimony for Christians who simply have this arrogant, insolent, stick-it-in-your-ear mentality toward the government, which we may not particularly like at any given moment in time. I don't think that's a good testimony. It seems arrogant and defiant, and again, Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, which was a very unpopular message to the Jewish people in the first century.
Yeah.
They did not like the Roman government at all. And he was saying, look, that part belongs to Caesar. Don't make a big deal of it. Give to Caesar. Give to God what belongs to God. That's where we have to draw that line. What can I give to God? What must I give to God and God alone that I cannot and will not give to government? And then what should I give to government because I understand the need for government in an imperfect and fallen world?
So I thought, again, we were talking about how this turned so practical, and I thought as we broached that subject and we get to unpack some maybe more nuanced things on the podcast, just in talking with you and being on the team here at Calvary, I know that we've walked through a season sort of recently where we had to really toe some of these lines. So I was thinking, I was wondering if you would kind of unpack these thoughts in looking in hindsight, maybe, or looking back on your decision making through the pandemic season we just came through, right? So because I know, and you fill in the gaps here with the correct version of the story, but the bullet points is at one point, obviously you're our senior pastor here. We our number one, I forget what the name. We gather for worship. We that's a thing we do. We gather for worship. We've felt like that is so critical, that the Bible talks about how critical that is. We've taught our people how critical that is, and yet there's a moment within the last 2 years where you are asked. And again, this is where I encourage you to jump in. You are asked, hey, we'd rather you not gather for worship right now from a governmental authority.
Well, this is very important, and it's kind of been like a test case in a way, and it's been a learning moment. I mean, we're going to be studying reactions to COVID for years to come, and it has created enormous tension in our culture and sometimes even within the Christian community, sadly. I get all that, and we're still wrestling with it. But it's a great, it's a great illustration. The other thing, though, before I jump in and give our thought processes there, was it's also confusing because different parts of the country have reacted very, very differently. And our system of government is not just federal, but it's state and local level. And sometimes the state and local level has more impact than the federal government, and I honestly think that's the way our founding fathers envisioned it. Sometimes I think the federal government just has way too much impact and steps way out of its line. So sometimes, a person in the federal government will say something, but that doesn't mean they have authority necessarily to execute it in our county or in our city. So a lot of times we looked to our city and our county and our state, and we know they don't always get along. Like our governor said things, and local school boards are defying them, and then they go, and then we have courts to settle those issues. Okay, so where does that leave you if you're not in the court? You're like, well, do I listen to him or do I listen to him? It's very much can be very confusing. And we've been criticized on both sides, not by most people, but there have been some never should have shut down, some never should have opened up. Although now that's dissipating because, by the way, the numbers in Florida are fantastic. We're among the best now in the country. And, I've avoided giving too many unqualified opinions on COVID because we have enough of those. But I kind of think one of the things we've learned is viruses are going to do what viruses are going to do. And a lot of the things governments have tried to do to mitigate that haven't worked. They're just going to run their course. And so here we are in a state with no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates. In fact, you're not supposed to be allowed to do that in the state of Florida. None in our area for a long while now. And now, everybody was writing about us in the summer, and now the news media apparently is going somewhere else because our numbers, I read yesterday, are the best in the country in some areas.
Yeah, I've heard
so
that.
it's kind of like there are these rise and falls in viruses. Yeah. Having said that, our thinking along the line was we want to do what government authorities want us to do. You kind of have a collision here of values. On the one hand, there is a strong value to physically gather for worship. The Bible says that, says it explicitly. We are to forsake not the assembling of ourselves for worship. There we have it. Second, then we have a value if we submit to governing authorities because they serve God's purposes. In a broken world, we need government. And so for everybody, it's like a collision there. Yes, we're going to obey God over man, but does that mean if the government says, hey, don't meet this week? For instance, if there were a hurricane bearing down upon us and the government came on, the government that's going to help, help people in trouble, get the power back on, keep people from drowning and blowing away, said, please stay off the road today. It's the weekend. We're asking no one to be on the road. We're asking the public not to gather. Cat 5 storm is going to hit, whatever. Well, I don't think there would be many people going, we should defy the government. I think people would recognize, hey, this is an unusual moment. The government is not asking us indefinitely and perpetually not to gather for worship. They are not trying to infringe upon religious freedoms. They're trying to use common sense and good judgment to keep people safe. So we all get that. It's where the balance is that becomes the controversy.
Right.
And going back to 2020, for me, while it was a hard decision, it was an easy decision all at the same time. We did not know what this virus was going to do. We were being given worst-case scenarios. And while I don't remember if we were ever ordered not to meet in our area, it was, and in our state, I think the governor intentionally did not go that far, for which I am grateful. I commend this governor for doing a lot of things in this COVID-19 period. That's my personal opinion, but I'm very grateful we've had the governor we've had. And if I remember right, even in the middle of when everybody almost felt like common sense is, hey, let's not meet for a few weeks. Even then, I think the governor had stopped short of an order. It was more of, we strongly suggest, we strongly encourage. Now, I know there was one pastor in Hillsborough County that got arrested, and I really think they shouldn't have arrested him. I thought he was being a bit irresponsible and a little bit defiant to resist them, but, they kind of worked it out, and I think everybody's happy now. So my point is, we wanted to do the right thing for our community and neighbors, and even pastors that later became defiant, at the beginning, we were kind of all in this together. You remember when we were all in this together?
Yeah.
It was last year, like 3 days. We were all in this together until we weren't. Now we're more apart than ever. But at that point, to me, it was easy. Hey, do what the government is not trying to infringe upon religious liberty. They are not trying to keep you from worshiping. They're not trying to tell you how or what to worship. They're simply saying right now we are facing a crisis, a danger. We're asking people not to gather in large groups. And let me tell you this, 99% of the guys I know were willing to comply, happy to comply, wanted to cooperate. And in our state, I can't speak for others, but in our state, both our local city, our county, and our state administrators, all the way up to the governor, were always, I felt like, respectful and not going beyond their authority, but were at the same time trying to do the right thing. I got nothing but praise for them. Republicans or Democrats in our area, I think everyone kind of tried to stay within the right lines. I appreciate that because I don't think that's the case in every state. I don't think that's the case in every city. And I empathize with some pastors in other places and other cities who, while they were initially willing to cooperate, absolutely, like we don't know how many people are going to get sick and how many people are going to die. And I remember early on thinking, if you just walk by somebody on the street, you might get it. I remember thinking one time, could we do communion? Like, could we let people come to the church and honestly, we spent a couple hours one day when we were shut down thinking, and it was right around Easter, could we were thinking, could we let people come in the parking lot and one at a time come in the building and walk down front and receive communion if we had masks and gloves on, and that way they could come into the church building and then go out another. We had this. We set for a long time to think, could we create that? And honestly, the bottom line was, it's just not worth it. It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
Now I kind of laugh because now knowing what we know, that would not have been particularly dangerous. But we just didn't know then. So we did the best we could, and none of us were not wanting together. We just understood this was an emergency situation, and we wanted to cooperate fully. But in other cases, that was not the place. In other places, that was not the case. In other places, all of a sudden, governments really seemed to overstep their boundaries. They were allowing, like at one point, I think in Vegas, I read where they were allowing casinos to have so many people, but churches were told not to gather, or in other places. And it really broke down where people could see on TV. You had all the protests going on, and the government wasn't trying to stop that. And yet then they turn around and say, yeah, but your churches can't gather. And in other cases, they saw people gathering for political events, but your church isn't allowed to gather. And then, of course, it really gets bad when, political elites, when people in power, they can gather and go out to the fancy restaurant and gather in a group, but you're supposed to stay home. Well, that's where we lost it.
Yeah.
And I would say this, there were a lot of, not all of them, because a lot of leaders did very good work, but there were a lot of people in political leadership who I think blew their credibility with their inconsistency and their desire to overstep their boundaries. And I do have an empathy with some pastors in some places. I think some could have done it better, maybe, because I don't want to ever come across as defiant and jerky. Is that a word? Jerky, like acting like a jerk.
Jerkish.
Jerkish, yeah. And there are some who just, it's like they're itching to get on TV and be defiant. I don't, that to me isn't the spirit of Romans 13. But I do have empathy with some who felt like at some point the government was simply way overstepping a boundary here. And this was a religious conviction. And they were going to come to church. And they challenged it. There were several courts. For instance, court cases, the Capitol Hill Baptist Church. This was a case that didn't get a lot of national news. Challenged D.C., and won. And D.C. had to actually pay damages to the Capitol Hill Baptist Church. And I always felt like their attitude was very submissive and respectful. But there was a situation, they just wanted to meet outside in the district. And they were being told, no, you can't gather, even outside.
Wow.
And they were pointing out, yeah, well, you're letting this group gather. You're letting this protest happen. Yeah. You're letting, and they sued and they won. District of Columbia lost. And there have been some other cases where the government had to walk it back.
Yeah.
And there have been other cases I wish they had, they had lost. But, and by the way, that's part of our legal system. That's how you do challenge authorities.
Right.
And so, to me, that's not necessarily insubordination. It's in our system. We don't have a king. Remember, our president is not a king. He doesn't get to say, do this, and we're expected to comply. We have a system in which there are checks and balances, and we have local government, state government, and you have ways in which you can challenge that. That's where the courts come in.
Right.
So all of those things can be done without violating the letter of Romans 13, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
The letter of Romans 13 is, I just feel like I'm above following anybody. I'm above government. I don't have to listen. I'm going to do what I want to do because I want to do it. And that is a prescription for disaster.
Well, I'm glad you brought up cases like the Capitol Hill Baptist Church, because I think that's another nuance. Again, I started with the history of most of our listeners are American because that's where we are. That's our context. So that's our history. That's where we come from. And also, Paul's writing this letter. Paul is a Roman citizen, so Paul has some rights. But there's probably lots of Jewish people and otherwise that they don't have much rights in the Roman Empire. But we, as Americans, we do. We have a lot of rights. We have a lot of opportunity. So how do you navigate that nuance of I can disagree, submit, and also actively work against? Like that's a funny twist.
That is a twist because we are in a Republican democracy. That's not political parties. Republican means representative, and democracy means people have a vote. So we're both Republican and Democrat, which is where those names come from. Just depends on what level you're talking about.
Right.
But we are in a government, we think, that it is the best type, not that it's always the best, but that it is, again, knowing that every government is going to be imperfect, that it represents the best views of reality to believe that people have individual rights and liberties that are conferred by God, not government. And so we give to the government certain power, but we constrain the government's power as well. And we have the right in this country to protest. We have the right to disagree with the president. We have the right to vote against the president or against the governor or against a senator or for a senator. We have a right to give to the campaign, to be involved in the political process. We have many people at Calvary who get involved in the political process, attend events, attend rallies. None of that is insubordinate. None of that. For instance, if somebody is today saying, well, I don't like President Biden, I don't like his decisions, I don't like his policies, and I am going to actively work to see something change.
Right.
That's absolutely legitimate. There's nothing illegitimate about that at all. That is not, you can't quote Romans 13 and say, see, you got to do whatever you're told.
Right.
Now, you need to follow the laws that are for the good of the society. You need, and there are times you may not like the law, but you still need to follow the law. But as part of a democratic society, I also have the opportunity to speak, to voice my opinion, and to make changes in government. In fact, I think that we should. I think we would be negligent in our responsibilities if we did not engage that process. Romans 13, though, is about recognizing the need for government authority in our lives to restrain evil in society and accepting that. And so it is not a wise or biblical or gospel movement that seeks simply to protest authority for the sake of revenge or bitterness or a naive belief that the world would be a better place if there were no government authorities. All of those would violate, I think, a gospel worldview.
So that political involvement is something I wanted to talk about too, because the another part of the message on Sunday was about justice. We talked about justice. There's a lot. It's a buzzword right now. Social justice, something a lot of people are talking about, and a lot of the calls are appeals to governmental authorities or entities to govern differently, to change laws, or things like that. So we're talking about being involved politically. We're talking about getting into that lane to try to see change happen. And kind of a question I had from that was, as we're seeking to bring more justice into the world, which I don't remember if you were able to get to them, but you had listed biblical passage after biblical passage after biblical passage that says we should be about that. We should be people of justice. We should be people that seek justice, particularly for the oppressed and for the.
I had that in my notes, and I just knew I ran out of time. I just knew I wouldn't have to. Sometimes I have to edit on the fly, and we've used those lists in the past. We did a message back in July, around the July 4th weekend of 2020, and I just pulled the list from there called Liberty and Justice for All. So if someone wants to go back to whatever the July 4th weekend in 2020 was, that was a message entitled, and I had the list in there, all the biblical, not all, but a number of biblical passages that deal with doing justice.
I'll put that message in the notes as well. You can, if you have the Bible app, put the word justice in there. It's all over the Bible. It's 15 passages you had listed. So I guess one of my thoughts is, to what extent should we have any sort of either hope or expectation that the government could bring about any sort of justice? Yeah,
that's a great question. The quick answer is a tempered and sober expectation. And here's what I mean by that. This is a buzzword, even in church circles today. And the temptation now is, for whatever reason, become one of those flag words, justice, particularly if you describe social justice. You put the adjective social justice up there, which means justice in society. I'm not really sure what other type of justice there is. At some point, if you talk about biblical justice or divine justice, it works itself out in human relationships in society. I'm not sure how you can divorce the idea of biblical justice from social justice. And what happens is when you use that word, people now retreat to their partisan corners and throw out their talking points. Or even in evangelical circles right now, they're retreating to their corners and throwing out talking points. So among some, for instance, in case people don't know this, any mention of social justice is like a red flag. In fact, I've heard one well-known author, preacher that people love to quote, say, we shouldn't even use the phrase social justice. It's just so rife with misunderstanding. My point, again, on that is, as I just said, I don't know how you have justice without at some point being in society. I mean, so whatever adjective you want to use, you can come up with another one, but at some point you're talking about some level of social justice.
Right.
Having said that, he's not completely wrong at all that the term social justice has become hijacked by people who mean different things, like the term pro-choice. If you just looked at pro-choice, most of us go, yeah, I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-autonomy, like people being... No, it's what we understand now the word has come to mean that causes us who are pro-life, which is also a bit of a slogan. But those of us who believe that abortion is an injustice look at that word and go, we kind of have an aversion to it. So I do get it. Words mean things, and they come to mean things other than what the dictionary says they sometimes mean. Hence the concern about social justice. But I do think sometimes it's an overreaction. So any church now that has a conversation about social justice or tries to lean into some of the racial issues and let's talk about racial justice, or let's talk about what sometimes is called systemic injustice. Has racism through the years created systems in which inadvertently or unconsciously racial discrepancies can be perpetuated? Any conversation like that, there are some on the right side of the political spectrum who just, their heads explode and you're woke, you're left wing, you're liberal, whatever, which is ridiculous. I mean, all those conversations are legitimate. Let's have those conversations. Having said that, on the left side of the political spectrum, social justice has come to mean a lot of things that have nothing to do with justice as defined by the Bible. See, as we look at justice in the Bible, and this was an important point we were trying to make, justice comes from the character of God. Justice isn't determined by a mob or a majority, or you or I. This is why later Paul will write, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." You're not just enough to figure out let's get even. You don't know what even looks like. What would you know about even, right? Yeah. So God is the only one who is just. How do we therefore understand justice? By knowing more about God, by knowing His Word. We think that telling the truth is just and lying to someone is unjust, for instance. Why? Because God is truth. Hurting someone is unjust. Why? Because God is love. And so to create cruelty or pain on someone, to steal is unjust. Why? Because God says, "Do not steal." That would not reflect the character of God.
Yeah.
So justice is determined by God. The problem in our culture, and the reason I answered your question by saying, your question was, how much confidence should we have in the government to bring about justice? And I said, limited or temper or sober, because the problem today in our culture is because we have moved away from a gospel vision, a Christian worldview, our ideas about justice are now necessarily flawed. And a lot of the people talking about justice, what they really mean is, I want to get even. I feel like I've been treated unfairly. And even that is debatable at times. But from their own perspective, I've been treated, because some people say, I've been treated unfairly because you didn't give me a job that paid a certain amount. And when you point out, well, you're not capable of doing that job that gets paid a certain amount, it doesn't matter. They see it as unfair. So what happens is much of the conversations about justice are simply reconciling a perceived unfairness.
Right.
And understand, as soon as that becomes the conversation, you're not talking about real justice. Real justice is rooted in the character of God. Real justice is asking the question, what is the right thing to do? How do I truly treat another person in view of what I know about the character of God? And justice comes from that. So when a person is only talking about getting even, when a person is only talking about getting what they want or being treated fairly, that's not justice. That's not justice at all, and that's what will perpetuate more injustice even. So because in our culture we have a broken worldview that no longer really accepts a Judeo-Christian framework, I fear for our justice conversations. And I think the people who criticize social justice so badly, that's what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, you can't use that vocabulary well because you don't even know what you're saying. And to a degree, they're right. All you mean is, I want to get even. I want to get paid a certain amount. I want this given to me. That's not justice. That has nothing to do with justice. Justice has to do with, how do I treat people in light of the character of God? And so some of the people crying for justice, it isn't justice. They don't even know what justice is. Yeah. So that is why I would say in this. Now, let me get back to the question, Rome 4, and then you can follow up. The problem, so that's the problem. The other thing is you say, yeah, but there are good people, and we do need government to work for justice. Absolutely. Yeah. I would just temper your expectations. Yes. No government is going to create a system that is perfectly just because people themselves are not perfectly just. So even at their best, which we are certainly not today, but even at our best, we're gonna fall short of perfect justice. Like, we could brag about our justice system. There are certain rights that people have that, as Americans, we sometimes say, that's great. A person is innocent until they're proven guilty. A person has a right to an attorney, et cetera, et cetera. Well, does that mean our justice system is perfectly just every time? No. Talk to enough people, and you'll find some people who got caught in the wheels of that and had a really bad experience. And everyone knows that if you're wealthy, you can afford the best attorneys. If you're poor, you're likely to get stuck with, some guy's got a backlog and doesn't really have time. So does a wealthy person get better representation than a poor person? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Do we think that's just? No, we wouldn't think that's just. And yet, we would argue that everybody gets a representative, and we try to create so that no matter how poor you are, the government will provide you a lawyer. Well, a lot of places you wouldn't get that. So it's like we try to do something that is just and right, and we should keep working for justice. We should never give up wanting our community, our country to be more just. Right. We should never give up on that. Absolutely. So to those of you who you feel like I'm cutting out your idealistic legs, please, before you send the letters, yes, you should, in the criminal justice system, in politics, in business, in all the arenas of our culture, you should work for justice. Please, let's work for justice. When you go to the voting booth, ask yourself, which candidate represents a more just view of the world, who is more likely to treat people in a way that is consistent with the character of God. It's why, I don't mind saying this, you can send your cards and letters to Anthony Russo. I have a very difficult time. I'm not sure I've ever voted for somebody who has a view about abortion that is a liberal view. I tend to vote pro-life, not pro-choice, because I think it's a justice issue. I think it's one of the great justice issues of our time. Now, I also understand that in every candidate and party, there are other issues that intersect. Right. I get that. That's why it gets complex. Yeah. And people sometimes will say, well, I voted for that candidate. I liked about 62% of them, and then I had to accept about 20%, and the rest I'm just, praying for the Lord to come back, whatever, because there's not going to be a perfect candidate. Yeah. So I get that also, and I do get that. Right. But we should work for justice. We should have a reasonable view of what government can do. Let's work to make our country, our culture, a better and a more just place, but let's also understand that you will always need government authority because people are broken. We live in a fallen world.
And that is why we spent so much time on this frame, if you've been following along with the series, because seeing things through that lens really, really puts all these things in the right places. And I think sometimes, especially over the last couple of years, where you've seen Christians that got really too over-invested into the political specter, it's like you had too much hope on something delivering something it won't deliver.
Yep. The classic conservative position politically, by the way, understands the limitations of government. And again, I'm not arguing one or the other, but the classic conservative position is government can only do so much, and we just need to conserve it. And the classic progressive position would be, hey, we need government to do certain things. And at our best in our country, both of those wings tempered their expectations. But now it's kind of like you have both on the far right and on the far left a view that if only we could run the government, we would have a utopia. Like we would fix everything that's wrong. And I think when you vote and when you engage in the political process, you should have reasonable expectations. And those reasonable expectations understand people are sinners, they're broken, they're fallen. You should work to make the world a better place. But this world is always going to be broken. And even if your favorite candidate gets elected president, even if, many of you are thinking, if only I were the president and I was a dictator, the world would be a better place. The reality is it would still be broken. It would fall short. And the rest of us, speaking for the rest of us, we are glad you're not the dictator. Because while you think that in your head, the rest of us have less expectations of that. And that's true for all of us, though.
Right.
It's easy for us to think, I could fix those. We would do this, we would do that.
Right.
And the reality is we're in a fallen world. We're in a broken world. People are sinners. We don't all have the answers. So we should have not low expectations, but reasonable, tempered expectations for what government can do. And when you have unfairness in this world, injustice in this world, I'm not saying excuse it or overlook it or don't work to overcome it, but I am saying you should not be stunned.
Right.
Teach your kids the world is not always fair. When they come home and say it's not fair, go, well, that's the first of many experiences that you will have that are not necessarily fair because the world is imperfect and broken. Now, go to work to make it more fair and more fair for others, but understand you're going to encounter unfairness along the way.
That's right. That's all so well said. And if this podcast has taught us anything, we're going to be stuck in this until somebody gets the sense to put Cheryl Rice in charge.
That's right.
Then we'll get some things.
We would be better off.
Straightened out.
We would be better off. I can tell you that. We would eat better. I probably
we would. Definitely.
We would all be better. But and we laugh at that. The answer is, of course, there is one, and the government will be on his shoulder. And he's the Prince of Peace and the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And our Christian worldview, getting back to that gospel, that last part of the frame is, yes, we see a better day coming. We are realistic and tempered in our expectations, but we're not pessimists because we know what is coming. So not to pull it back into the serious after we've had a moment. That's our hope.
I wanted to end on a quote, actually, that I thought was so good because you were talking about justice being a reflection of the character of God, and then you ended the message by saying, the outline was do the right thing, do the loving thing, and you talked about how even the character of God, when you're seeking after that, you get justice and you go beyond that and you go to love. And you start doing I wanted to read this quote. Sorry to read a quote to you while you're here, but it was so good. The quote was, "While we should seek to do justice, we must learn to love as well. It goes beyond doing the right thing and leads us to do the divine thing, the loving thing." And I thought that was such a great sentiment to end the whole thought. Again, work for justice, seek justice. Know that in government, in authority figures in our area, in our community, in our country, it's never going to quite get there. But then even go beyond that as Christians and go to the loving place, do the loving thing. I thought that was such a great spot to end the message.
And that's what we need, and that's what separates the cause of Christ and should separate us as people of Christ. It's more than just demanding. It's certainly more than demanding we get our way. Above that is demanding what is just or working for what is just, because that's different than getting our way. But then beyond that, to love our neighbors ourselves. That's the highest part of the law, and that's what Christ has done for us. He didn't give us justice.
Right.
He's a just God.
Right.
Who gave us mercy.
Right. So good. Again, if you missed the message, we'll put the link in the podcast notes. Go back and check it out. It's been a really great series. Another message in it coming this weekend.
Last one.
Hope that you can join us either in person or online. And thanks so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you for coming along for the ride. So many of you leave reviews, and reach out. Let us know you're listening. That's so appreciated. You continue to do that. Helps get the word out about the podcast. And we'll be back again very soon with another episode.